Hey everyone, thanks for your flexibility this week. Hope you enjoy the Super Bowl if you are into that, and we'll look forward to hopefully next year all getting to host neighborhood Super Bowl parties, right? Because Super Bowls can be a very fun time to celebrate together. So for our talk this week, I'm going to be looking at a passage that I think will be familiar to many people out of Isaiah 40, and kind of the image I wanted us to have in mind as we were looking at this passage is the image of kind of rediscovering something we think we already know, something that we are familiar with. I was reading a book recently in which an introduction by another famous author said, "Look, this is one of the few books in my vast pile of reading and things I'm always wanting to do that I revisit every handful of years. It's good enough, and it feels like there's always something new. I keep rediscovering new insights, new ways of being, new ways of thinking when I reread this author every handful of years. I've experienced this as well when I pull out some of my old textbooks, and I look through at I write in my books like crazy, and so I think about some of the things that I thought were important 5 or 6 years ago, and I read this, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. When I first read this, the things that I thought were important, the big points, have changed. And I've even had a few times where I've discovered something I didn't like or something that I thought I just totally understood and knew. I had totally swung and missed. I didn't really get what it was actually about. And you discover these rich treasures that were already yours. And so this image of kind of rediscovering something we already know, rediscovering something that's already with us, I think is significant for this passage in two ways. One, this is a pretty familiar passage. It's been on many a poster. It's one that people have probably heard much better sermons on than you'll hear in the talk today. And so I think it's one that we need to be careful not to go on autopilot, not to just totally miss. It's also one that has some good significance, I think, for the situation we're in right now. I also bring up this image of rediscovering things because I think that is functionally what God is trying to do in this passage. He is dealing with very weary and very depressed people. And he is trying to remind them of who he is and the way he works in the world. This is a group of people who, again, this is written to the exiles. These are people who have watched many of their friends and family be slaughtered. These are people who watched their hometown burned to the ground. We complain about our culture being in collapse sometimes nowadays, but they had literally seen their culture collapse and be taken away from them. And the question in their minds is, where is God? Is God still good in the midst of these circumstances? And so I think God is inviting them to rediscover him. He's inviting them to be energized by who he is in a new way, despite the circumstances, despite the really difficult situation and the weariness that they are currently feeling. So I'm going to start out by reading verse 9 of this chapter because it's a longer section. I won't have enough time to read through the whole thing. And I think verse 9 is kind of the key to this whole section, which is this. Go up on a high mountain, messenger Zion, raise your voice and shout, messenger Jerusalem, raise it, don't be afraid, and say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. And I think this phrase of here is your God is the key one for this because it's going to look at many different aspects of who God is. But it is about rediscovering, being reintroduced to who God is and his significance for our lives and for the original readers' lives as well. So I'll skip down to verse 12. Again, here is your God. Who has measured the waters in the palm of a hand, or gauged the heavens with a ruler, or scooped the earth's dust up in a measuring cup, or weighed the mountains on a scale and the hills in a balance? Who directed the Lord's Spirit and acted as God's advisor? Whom did he consult for enlightenment? Who taught him the path of justice and knowledge, and explained to him the way of understanding? Look, the nations are like a drop in a bucket, and valued as dust on a scale. Look, God weighs the islands like fine dust. Lebanon doesn't have enough fuel. Its animals aren't enough for an entirely burned offering. All the nations are like nothing before God. They are viewed as less than nothing and emptiness. So to whom will you equate God? To what likeness will you compare him? An idol? A craftsman pours it. A metal worker covers it with gold and fashions silver chains. The one who sets up an image chooses wood that won't rot, and then seeks a skilled artisan to set up an idol that won't move. Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Wasn't it announced to you from the beginning? Haven't you understood since the earth was founded? God inhabits the earth's horizon. Its inhabitants are like locusts, stretches out the sky like a curtain, and spreads it out like a tent for dwelling. God makes dignitaries useless, and the earth's judges into nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely is their shoot rooted in the earth, when God breathes on them and they dry up, and the windstorm carries them off like straw. So to whom will you compare me? And who is my equal, says the Holy One. Look up to the sky and consider, who created these? The one who brings out their attendants one by one, summoning each of them by name. Because of God's great strength, the mighty one, not one is missing. Why do you say Jacob and declare Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My God ignores my predicament. Don't you know, haven't you heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't grow tired or weary. His understanding is beyond human reach, giving power to the tired, reviving the exhausted. Youths will become tired and weary, and young men will certainly stumble. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will fly up on wings like eagles. They will run and not be tired. They will walk and not be weary. So this reintroduction of God is systematic in some ways. And again, I'm not reading the entire passage. I would encourage you to do so because it's beautiful and it's dense and there's so much there. But the section I was able to look at a little more thoroughly, we see a couple of different things going on. This first section, we see this kind of universal power and strength of God, right? Who has measured the waters in the palm of their hand, engaged the heavens with a ruler, or scooped up the earth's dust in a measuring cup, or weighed the mountains on a scale and the hills on a balance? I think the image there is just the size of God, this creator God, how huge he is, and that all of creation, these things, mountains and heavens and all of the dirt and dust on the earth, these things are tiny to God. He's so much bigger than anything else we are going to find in creation. And who directed the Lord's Spirit? Who acted as God's advisor? Whom did he consult for enlightenment? Who taught him the path of justice and knowledge and explained to him the way of understanding? This time we're looking at the interior life. Again, these are the significant categories of philosophy. Who taught God justice? Something that we are very hungry for nowadays, right? Who taught God the good life? Who taught God about wisdom and enlightenment? We got a million teachers nowadays. God didn't need a teacher. He is the source of the goodness of the interior life. He's the God of the vast, huge creation. He's the God of the best of our interior lives, of wisdom and of strength. And then it continues, look, the nations are a drop in a bucket, the valued as dust on a scale. God weighs the islands like fine dust. Lebanon doesn't have enough fuel. Its animals aren't enough for an entirely burnt offering. All the nations are like nothing before God. They are viewed as nothing, as less than nothing, and of emptiness or breath. The idea there is, in comparison with God, even culture and the biggest achievements of humanity aren't as impressive as we think they are. In God's mind, again, he can weigh it. It's less than this dust that is left on a scale after it has been weighed. God is, in this entire section, he's sifting through, he's gauging for value for all these things that we think are significant, that are powerful, whether that's, the interior life of wisdom, whether that's the greatness of creation, whether that's the greatness of culture and the power of some of these nations that are in the world. I think this last one is a significant reminder, considering it would be pretty easy to be impressed with this empire that has just conquered them. They've seen its raw power and violence, and it would be pretty easy to mistake them for something big and powerful and important because of what had just been done to these people. Nowadays, I think we're in the same case. It can be hard to argue with the results we sometimes see, the raw power that humanity is able to wield. And yet this passage is reintroducing us to our God, a God who is frankly not that impressed with all those things that we are so impressed by. And so the next section in some ways kind of digs into the context of where they find themselves. And it's going to ask the question again, okay, we've talked about this universal God and what God sees, this big picture, but let's look at some of the other things that are in your face right now that are significant distractions that are saying this is valuable, this is important. So the first one he goes to is this description of these idols, which the town of Babylon, where they found themselves, they had many. They were a very religious city. They had tons of gods and many different ways of worshiping them. And yet, all of these images, all of these gods, God says this. So to whom will you equate God? To what likeness will you compare him? An idol? A craftsman pours it, a metal worker covers it with gold and fashions silver chains. The one who sets up an image chooses wood that won't rot and then seeks a skilled artisan to set up an idol that won't move. I think it's interesting in this description here, he again is pointing out kind of the craftsmanship that goes into the created idol here. And there are other passages like this in the Bible that are very mocking, making fun of these statues and the fact that they sometimes they fall over and have to be propped up, and like, yeah, what a god this is. This passage in Isaiah is actually pretty neutral. He basically just describes the process, and I think the implication there is, compared to the God we were just looking at that weighs nations, that is in charge of the entire universe, that is in charge of the interior life, this description doesn't need a lot of comment, right? It's, if you really sit down and examine the work of their hands, this thing that they made and yet they are worshiping, it doesn't really hold up to kind of close analysis, which I think is an interesting point for us as modern people who, yeah, we don't worship at statues, yet we often worship the things we have made. Maybe not always vocally, we may not even believe it, but with our time and our energy and our love, going towards things that we have often made with our own hands or have been made for us by other people. And like many of those idols back in the day, I can't help but wonder is how well will those things that we give so much time and energy to really hold up on close analysis. It continues. Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Wasn't it announced from you at the beginning? Haven't you understood since the earth was founded? God inhabits the earth's horizon. Its inhabitants, like locusts, stretch out like the skies of a curtain, spreading out like a tent for dwelling. God makes dignitaries useless, the earth's judges into nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely their shoot rooted in the earth, when God breathes on them and they dry up. The windstorm carries them off like straw. So to whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Here, I think the consideration is, okay, yeah, maybe we're not that impressed with the idols around us, but maybe we should be impressed with some of the leaders or people who get things done, right? Again, it's easy to be impressed with the generals and the kings and the armies of people who have just destroyed you. You may not like them, but it's easy to be impressed with them. And we feel the same way nowadays. It's easy to be impressed with an expert. It's easy to be impressed with someone who wields power well and gets things done. And yet, God here again is saying, compared to me, compared to my steadfastness, compared to my length, these things that seem so significant are flavors of the week. I think God bothers saying this begin because it's a possible distraction. We easily like to rally around people that are impressive, that we think will get things done, that are smart and are going to figure these things out. And God is pointing out again, don't fall for this. This thing is ultimately going to fail you. It's not enough. It's not me. These impressive leaders are here for a minute, and then they're gone again soon. So then look up to the sky and consider, who created these? The one who brings out their attendants one by one, summoning them, each of them by name. Because of God's great strength and mighty power, not one is missing. So he's talking about the stars there in the heavenly bodies, and I thought this was a little odd when I first ran into just the placement of this, but it makes sense if you remember that Babylon, where they had been pulled into, is famous for its magicians and for its astrologers. They had very advanced astronomy, and in a lot of ways, they probably worshipped the sky and the things going on there more than they did their gods. Their gods were kind of petty and small, and they thought sometimes that the influence of the celestial bodies, which are, worked like clockwork, which were more impressive and above kind of the fray of the daily life. And yet, as God does in many things that we look at and are impressed by, including just the intricacy, the beauty, the power we see in the natural world, and God reminds us again that these are things that in fact testify to me. They are things that point towards me, so we can mistake the messenger for the message. We can see some really impressive things in the world or in the natural world, but God is saying they are pointing to me. They're smaller than me. I know them. I can name each and every one of them. They're mine. They're not worth your worship, and they're not worth your full attention. Now, I think if this passage of the story stopped here, it would be impressive. God is huge. God is powerful. God is above all these things we might value or desire to value. And yet, this is not ultimately a story or a self-description of God about his power and as the creator God. It is a description of God who is near and God who is available. So he says, look, rediscover me. It's this huge God that is bigger than the circumstances and the weariness you are facing right now. And know that I am available. I am here. Why do you say, Jacob, and declare, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? My God ignores my predicament. I think he's responding to this communal lament that we see in other parts of the book of Isaiah or in the Psalms or in the book of Lamentations. This communal lament that things are not right. And I think he sums it up so well, the way we feel when we are in pain and when we are frustrated with the way the world is, when our circumstances suck. My way is hidden from the Lord ignores my predicament. God is rebuking the idea that he is not near, that he is not available. And he says, don't you know, haven't you heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't grow tired or weary. His understanding is beyond human reach, giving power to the tired and reviving the exhausted. Youths will become tired and weary. Young men will certainly stumble. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will fly on wings like eagles. They will run and not be tired. They will walk and not grow weary. I think this passage is really important because all that power that God has been demonstrating, that hugeness, he is wanting to remind his people who he names here, who he draws near to. He says, I am available. That endless power and energy that is inherent in who I am, that is yours. It's available. You can take it up into yourself. You can have some new imagination in my presence to imagine life outside of these circumstances. When all of these false gods, all of these other things that seem so significant are in our face, calling for our loyalty, calling for a chance and a change. God is saying again, all that power I demonstrated is here and it is for you. It is available. He wants to draw us into that life and into that energy. He says, yes, youth and all these other things are going to be tired. But those who hope in the Lord, they are the ones who will renew their strength. They will run and not be tired, and walk and not grow weary. I think this passage is significant for us right now. I think many of us are weary. Maybe we are weary of kind of the cultural fighting and the political problems. Maybe we're weary of feeling isolated. Maybe we are weary of seeing the consequences of people out of work and in despair, and watching those who are vulnerable dying from disease. I think there's a lot of weariness right now. And to that, God does say the same thing. Rediscover me. Remember who I am. Remember my hugeness, my ability to create, and remember my availability and my nearness. I want you to soar on eagle's wings. I want you to know the energy and the life available in me for you, for them back in the day, little Jacob, when you feel little and unworthy, this unimpressive country, these unimpressive human beings nowadays. God says, I'm here and I am available. Rediscover me again. Remember those things that you won't know. And the key word here, as God is reintroducing himself, those who hope in the Lord. Hope is the virtue not of things being okay, not of not feeling weary, but trusting things can be better, that there is something beyond our current circumstances, that there is something beyond despair, that when God says, this is who I am, this is the light and the life I am bringing into the world, I'm going to do it. Hope is based on waiting patiently. It's based on letting God and his timing come true, but it's also based on the just the confidence that he knows what he's doing, that he does provide this energy, he does provide this strength for those that hope. And so I would just encourage us to look at this passage again with fresh eyes, to remember who it is we follow. It's not just God, the big God. This is our God, our available God right now in the midst of discouragement, in the midst of weariness. He's inviting us yet again to be people who hope in the Lord, who renew our strength, who fly on wings like eagles, who will run and not be tired, who will walk and no longer be weary. I just pray that each of us would discover this availability and nearness of God anew this coming week.